But I don't have COVID because I've been tested twice now. So that's good, right? I'm safe.
You are not safe.
As long as I stay out of South Elgin.
Right. We'll have a toll bridge.
Hey, Mark, go ahead and pull your agenda up. I can't change that screen. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Weird.
My daughter calls me on Saturday. Says, Dad, we needed to talk. And I said, oh, I don't like the way this sounds. So they send her home. She goes Monday for her test. She's Dad, why are you like this? Because it's my job. I don't know what to do.
Fabiola,
That's my dad's job.
Michelle and Fabiola, could you come here, please?
For those of you joining us for the web conference this afternoon for the CARES Act Allocation Committee, we're going to get started in about 2 or 3 minutes.
Hello, Roger.
The audio is on. We're ready to start.
Right, it's 3 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting of the CARES Act Allocation Committee to order. Ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Hanson,
Hanson here.
Kenyon,
Kenyon here.
Fraz,
Here.
Sanchez, Surges,
Surges here.
Thomas.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. First item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the committee this afternoon? Pardon? Oh, sure, I'll do that in a second after that. Sir, go ahead, public comment, if you'd like to address the committee. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Malone. I am the program manager, mediation programs manager over at the 3rd Street Courthouse. One thing I wanted to come speak with you about is a program that we are working to develop and ask for assistance from this committee. First, a little bit about myself. I run the foreclosure mediation program as well as the child abuse and neglect mediation program. These are two programs that are unique to Kane County. Kane County is one of only 3 counties in the state that provide a foreclosure mediation program, where lenders and homeowners can sit down when they are facing foreclosure in an attempt to work through the foreclosure and avoid that. We've been doing that for 7 years. It'll actually be 7 years and 2 weeks. And it's been a great success. It, of course, started from the crisis, and with great support from the county, we were able to launch that program. The child abuse and neglect mediation program, we work with children who've been taken by the state and parents and foster parents to try to reach equitable solutions. These are 2 programs that I developed with help from the county and the judiciary. With this relationship in mind, the judiciary has asked Judge Hall and Judge Bowles, Chief Judge Hall and former Chief Judge Bowles, Chief of the Civil Division, that I work on developing an evictions relief program. As we know, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many folks in Kane County have lost their jobs or are earning less money, or perhaps their businesses are not performing as they used to. This is going to lead to an evictions crisis. Evictions are expected to go up 3 to 10 times in Kane County. We are going to see an incredibly large wave of families being kicked out of their homes and landlords not collecting rent. To that end, we also know that we're going to see a flood of cases hitting the judiciary. The court calls are simply not built for this level of engagement. They are not prepared to handle this level of eviction activity, and they need help. And so the judges, as well as Doug Naughton, the court administrator, and Andrea O'Brien, the deputy court administrator, have asked that I develop this program. What we aim to do is to provide a system where litigants who are entering the evictions process have an opportunity to sit down and avoid eviction. I want to be clear on what avoid eviction means. That does not necessarily mean the tenant gets to stay in the property, although that would of course be a wonderful outcome. We hope to alleviate the strain that is falling on landlords. At the moment, landlords are shouldering a heavy burden, taking on those unpaid rents, taking on tenants who are not able to fulfill their obligations. At the same time, we don't want to see homeless people in Kane County. We don't want to see families kicked out onto the street, families without a place to go. Our program aims to address that in 3 ways. First, we will provide legal aid and housing counseling resources to both landlords and tenants. About 1/3 to half of landlords who enter the court system are pro se, meaning they are not represented. Oftentimes these are ma and pa type renters. People are renting out one property, not large landlords, and they aren't always savvy on the legal process. Providing them with legal information and legal aid can make sure that they are going through the process properly, that they are protecting their assets and their rights, as well as not violating the rights of others and slowing down the court process. Similarly, as we know, folks who can't afford rent typically can't afford an attorney. We want to make sure that they are afforded the same rights and protections under the law that any other litigant would be. So our program would aim to provide a legal aid resource there. Housing counseling is key when folks are going to lose their homes, whether those are rented or owned. They need to find somewhere to live. They need to find housing down the line. They need to find opportunities where they can, with maybe bad credit or less income than they're used to, find that housing that they need, stay in those communities. What we have learned through the foreclosure crisis and through the foreclosure program is that doing this helps property values. Nobody wants vacant properties, whether they're rental properties or owned properties. Nobody wants upset tenants who might destroy property when they leave out of bitterness and spite. That leads us to our second step, and that is mediation. Mediation is facilitated negotiation. You have the two parties sit down, the landlord and the tenant, and talk about the options. Again, in an ideal world, we'd be talking about ways for the tenant to stay in the property. We'd be talking about perhaps payment plans on back rent, perhaps forgiven rent, perhaps exchanges of services in place of rent, other ways that value can go from the tenant who owes the money to the landlord, the small business that is owed the money, right? And that can be a negotiated agreement. More time to come up with the money, whatever the case might be. Or when staying in the property is not realistic and not possible, when a tenant simply doesn't have a job. You can't squeeze water from a rock, as they say. We can talk about graceful exits. We can talk about ways for tenants to leave the property and feel like they were given a fair shake. They can plan ahead, perhaps given a little extra time to find new housing. They can leave on good terms. They know when to get out without fear of the sheriff showing up and removing them from that property. This leads to properties being in better condition, better able to be rented out again. That landlord, that small business.
Mr. Malone,
turn
we
that around.
typically limit
Sure, I
public
will.
comment to 5
I will.
minutes, so
Hurry.
if you could wrap it up.
Absolutely, I will hurry up.
Appreciate it.
The final part of our program would then be rent relief, and this is what I'm coming here to ask about and ask for guidance and assistance in some way. Again, you can't squeeze water from a rock, so we are asking for money that tenants can bring to the table, help facilitate and grease those wheels, move that process along. Landlords need help, tenants need help. The judiciary is looking for unique, innovative ways to address this problem, and I would really appreciate your consideration in funding such a program. We can serve between 500 and 1,000 residents of families in Kane County, and if you double that, the landlords are receiving that benefit as well. That's between 1,000 and 2,000 people or units in Kane County that could benefit from funding of our program. I'm happy to talk more about it some other time, and thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, sir. All right, is there anyone else that would like to address the committee this afternoon?
Mr. Chairman, there's Janine from the Northern Illinois Food Bank was signed up for earlier today. I don't know if she's on
Yes,
today.
I'm here. I was mostly joining in case there were any questions about our revised request committee.
All right, we can address that when we get to that part of the agenda. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks.
All right, anyone else that from the public that would like to address the committee? All right, hearing none, then I'll go back to item 2, which is approval of the minutes for October 26th. Mr. Froz moves, Mr. Hanson seconds. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Hanson, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Faraz,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
The minutes are approved.
Sanchez, yes.
We'll show Mr. Sanchez has arrived and his vote is yes on the minutes. Thank you. All right, under discussion items, item A is status of funds. Ms. Brady,
Good morning, or good afternoon.
good afternoon.
The current status is $82,640,377.
Right. Any questions on the funds? They are still invested. Any interest is accruing to the contingency fund at this
That is
point. All right, any questions of the treasurer's office? Hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, in terms of the agenda, I'd like to give some background just to explain as to where we stand right now, give the committee an update, and then get into some action items to consider at this meeting. In the beginning of the process, we developed all the programs that we felt were appropriate, and over the last several couple of months and several weeks, we've been receiving applications and vetting applications, both from outside governmental bodies, outside business owners, outside charitable organizations, and as well as the county and its various offices and departments. At this point in time, with respect to the municipal grant programs, that process has been vetted and completed by our consultants, and the applications have been approved. We've sent out intergovernmental agreements to the various municipalities to sign off on. Those are in the process of getting approved by the cities. And upon receipt of the signed agreements back, we'll be able to disperse the funds. There are two housekeeping items as it relates to the municipal requirements. And there were two municipal applications that came in a little bit later in the process and were vetted that need to be added to our approved list. So what I'd like to do is address adding those to the approved list of funds. And again, we would fill out, send them the intergovernmental agreements to move forward as indicated. The first is the Village of Barrington Hills. Their request is $7,849.25. I think that's consistent with the allocation that we had provided for. And then the second is the Village of Wayne, which has an allocation of $50,911. Both of these municipalities straddle multiple counties and have very small staffs. I know the Village of Wayne has a very small staff, but what I'd like to do is Fabiola has received their material, and this is a position that we would just simply modify the prior resolution to add these two as permissible recipients and the dollar amounts indicated.
Correct.
All right. So I'll entertain a motion to do that. It's moved by Mr. Fraz. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hanson. Any discussion?
Mr. Hushite, Chris
Yes.
Lawson. Let's see. I'm certainly in favor of providing relief to all of the local governments that apply. Are these modifications, were the applications turned in on time under the like the bylaws or the rules that were established by the CAC committee, or is this just an exception to those rules?
Both of these applications were submitted on time with the September 11th deadline. All municipalities had an extension to October 15th to amend their applications, and both are compliant.
Okay, thanks very much.
So this is just follow-up information, and these were consistent with the dollars that were originally allocated to those entities. Any further discussion? Clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Just for clarity, we're modifying a current resolution, or this be part of our vehicle that moves forward for the full board?
We're modifying the existing resolution to include these two additions.
Thank you. Hanson, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Braz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
All right, that resolution is approved. All right, moving on, in terms of the programs that, for the internal requests, the staff has been continuing to work with our consultant KEB to submit their requests for payroll and non-payroll reimbursements. That process has been moving ahead smoothly. There is one more conference call set up for Monday morning, first thing, with Joe Onzik, I believe, in our finance department and KEB to discuss, and with the health department to discuss clarification on a few of the health department requests. It's anticipated that those requests will be approved. Roger, can you bring up the
Mark's
colored spreadsheet?
colored one. Let's see. Which spreadsheet that's so Mark. You got the Excel, Mark?
Right. All of the payroll requests so far that were submitted were approved. I mentioned that at our last meeting. that's critical for our budget that we just approved and for next year's budget. Fine. No.
For profit. It should read summary 7/1 through 9/30/2020.
Was that in the email that you
Yes.
sent?
Yes.
Finish.
Bear with us for a minute and we'll bring this up on the screen. In substance, what this does is summarize the areas where there are still some open issues that need further discussion. And we're at a point now where the subject to KEB finalizing the final review, the one area of consideration that's going to have to be taken up by this committee and the board is not related to payroll, but it's non-payroll expenses. In the sheriff's area, this is not the spreadsheet that's on the screen that we were contemplating here, but I'll just cut through this to the point. As we all know, the sheriff had requested funding for a program that included purchase of radio equipment to upgrade our system. This is it. And if you look in the yellow column, the first few items are in the process of being vetted and expect to be resolved within the next week or so. But the last item, the $4,921,000, are sheriff's items that were, the bulk of that was for the radios. There was a $630,000 hazardous response vehicle, and then $210,000 for temperature checking systems. What we decided to do as a committee and as a board going into this process is to submit all our requests for approval that came from the various offices. For those that either didn't strictly meet the criteria in the opinion of the state's attorney's office and or the consultant, we requested that they bring those back to us for consideration. And given this list, the one item or the three items that I think we're going to have to decide on as a group is what we do with that request. There's a couple ways to approach this. One is to suggest that because it may be not black and white, that we go with reallocate those funds to a different purpose or project. That's one extreme. The other extreme is to understand the basis for the requests. Those bases have been submitted to this committee and the full board on multiple occasions by the sheriff for consideration. And the question is whether the board is comfortable with that explanation such that we would allocate the money for those purposes and be prepared to defend those expenditures in an audit after the fact. So that would be the other extreme. I suppose in between we could look at some but not all of the expenses, but the bulk of this relates to that radio program. So that's an action item. Our job was to create the programs, get the requests in, get them vetted. We're almost to the finish line on getting everything vetted. Again, that meeting on Monday hopefully will finalize most of the remaining issues, but this is an issue that isn't going to change. There's nothing more that can be provided at this point to the consultant. So it's this committee and the full board needs to make a decision as to what we want to do. The committee could choose to make a recommendation that we approve these items, and the board would then have to be prepared to defend those in the event that there was an audit next year. Recognize that just to break this down, to bring back the history on it, the radio program or the change in radios was geared at allowing our sheriff's department office to communicate with all the other departments on the same program. And essentially, this was a much more enhanced system, which allowed building penetration and some other benefits that we didn't have with our current program. It also dealt with some of the HIPAA issues that we dealt with regarding description of the problems that the people that were being responded to were experiencing from a health perspective. So that was the radio system. The other,
Chairman?
yes,
John, I was, if I remember correctly, I was a huge advocate of this when it came through both times. I don't remember the dollar figure being in the 4 million mark.
actually the entire project was $5 million. The sheriff cut that back by $1 million, funding a portion of it through his own resources.
So and it's too blurry for me to see, but
Can't see it.
so of the 4.9, does anybody have a breakdown of what those?
The 4.9 million is three items, as I was saying. It's 4 million for radios, $630,000 for the hazardous response vehicle, and $210,000 for 3 temperature checking systems that were purchased.
Was the 630 for the hazard vehicle, was that something that was approved outside of committee, meaning beforehand? I'm not going to say this correctly, but there was some perceived emergency authority that the department heads had, was that a purchase from there?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I believe it was approved in committee because I was opposing it and I lost.
Okay.
That's what I thought. I thought
So,
we've
yeah.
already done these.
Yeah, it was approved. I think the bigger question on both the radio system and the vehicles is can they still get them within the criteria of the program?
It's my understanding that they can. It's just a function of getting our final approval to include the payment of these through this program and having the board committed then to support or defend this going forward.
And in one of those meetings, I had even asked, not once, but twice, while Ron was here. So the reason we're doing this is because of the COVID hazard and the way you were responding. I
Right.
didn't think there was any question there. I thought it was absolutely defendable.
Well, you
And I
can
would
make the
continue.
argument then to the federal government for us. No, I'm
Yeah, and I would continue to support it.
sorry. No, I think there is a valid basis for it. I think if there, the reason this is not as clear cut as some of the other expenditures is that and I don't want to put words in the consultant's mouth, the state's attorney's position, but when you deal with something that can be considered capital that may provide benefits other than the COVID specific benefit, that may make that expenditure tend to seem that you're trying to accomplish another goal than dealing with a COVID situation. So I think that's where the distinction comes. It's just a function of being able to fund it. I personally don't have a problem if the will of the committee or as a board member supporting moving forward with these expenditures. I think the consensus of the board, we did try to pare down the radio system and the sheriff did absorb a portion of that through his own budget, or is willing to do that. But there are some calculated risks that we have to take. We do, I guess, and if you want to look at it from a big picture perspective, we did carry over funds into next year's budget to deal with special reserves and other issues that may come up. And hopefully there won't have to be another round of COVID funds coming to the county. But the point is that if there is a challenge to some of these items, we do have resources there that could be used to
So we're
cover
really
that.
not asking to okay these. You're just saying, by the way, these might.
No, I think,
problems, double
I think, no, I'm asking that at this point, as it relates to the county requests, we've put them all through the vetting process. It's tens of millions of dollars. This is the one area that isn't clear cut. And we need to either decide that we're going to approve these and go forward, or if we choose not to, then we're going to have those funds available for another purpose and we need to repurpose them.
Okay, I apologize. I thought these were already done. I would be more than happy to support them again.
All right, so you're moving that we would include the $4,921,931 as part of the approved expenditures under the county non-payroll program.
Yes, sir.
All right, is there a second to that? Mr. Fraz?
Thomas had a comment, I think.
Ms. Thomas? Sorry, blinded by the sun.
So I'm not comfortable with the vehicle, which I've expressed along the way. And to clarify, this was a second vehicle, correct?
No, I think, well, I know there was a debate about 2 vehicles that were for the coroner's office, but this is a separate vehicle.
Separate vehicle.
Yes.
Okay. But I have been against this vehicle the whole time. And even though the radio system might have to be defended, I think that's probably worth a shot. But I would propose maybe removing the other 2 items.
Well, I think the other 2 items, the temperature checking systems, I would argue that would probably be the most compelling of the 3 because it is before COVID, we didn't need to check temperatures in any building. I think the system that we've got here, if you're going to make an argument, if I had to choose one to defend, I would be able to defend that most aggressively.
Well, I guess the only reason I'm saying take it off the table since it's on the table is because it's a lower cost item, which we could fund, just have those monies directed somewhere else.
Right. So Ms. Thomas is in favor of the motion as it relates to the radios, but not the other 2. Any further discussion on this motion?
Chris Lawson again. Is another way of looking at this or expressing it is the board has supported these 3 purposes as the sheriff and his staff have presented it and presented it. I think that we've come to the point in the process where the state's attorney's office and KEB are being asked to sign off on are these eligible expenses. And I believe what I'm hearing is that the state's attorney's office and KEB are saying, well, we don't feel comfortable entirely, and so this is an area of exposure, and so we would like the board to assume the risk to defend this rather than our signing off on it as we're signing off on the other items. So there's a hesitation to it. John, I think that you describe it accurately as a calculated risk. I think that that's in the spirit that Cliff Surges is making his motion. Is that a fair, another way of describing where we are in the process and why we're making these motions?
Right. I think that is accurate, and I would just add to that, even if the state's attorney does approve an expenditure and KEB does approve expenditure, there's no 100% guarantee that couldn't be challenged. But we basically chose to go down this route to give us the highest level of protection we can get. So, yeah, there's gray area throughout the process. We've tried to make this as clear as we can, and you've accurately, Mr. Chairman, clarified what the position of KEB is and the state's attorney's office, and they just wanted us to know that going forward if we choose to move forward. All right, any further discussion on this? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Hanson, yes.
Kenyon,
Kenyon, yes.
Braz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
All right, the motion carries. So just for purpose of clarification, and I'll leave this up to the state's attorney's office and our staff, we've already approved, I believe, these expenditures in a prior resolution. So I just want to, if there's something we need to supplement to bring to the board at the board meeting, we'll put something together to that effect. Okay, all right.
Could I, this is Chris again, could I just clarify that the who and by when for the 2 actions that have just been taken, the resolution, the modification of the original resolution for Barrington, in favor of Barrington Hills and Wayne, and then also just the clarification of, the support that's been expressed and voted upon, who will provide that write-up?
I'll work with the
resolution?
state, I'll work with the state's attorney's
Okay.
office to put that together.
Okay, thanks very much, and
Okay.
and that'll be by Tuesday's meeting.
Yes,
Perfect. Thank you.
thanks. Mr. Hanson, you had a question?
Yeah, regarding the spreadsheet, as long as we're here, and maybe I'm getting ahead of the agenda here, but do the other 4 items in that yellow category need to be discussed too?
It's my understanding that, Fabiola, if I understood our discussion earlier today correctly, the first 3 items are being clarified with KEB right now
Yes, we're working through them.
for
right
them.
now.
And then the 518,000 IT, Roger, I believe that was resolved as well, right?
That
it's-
was resolved, yes.
Yeah.
So we have, we're still working through some of the expenses. And again, we have until December 30th to get through these, as
All
long
right,
as they're
but-
obligated.
But our goal is to try to wrap everything up. Well, we'll have that, I'll have a report back to you on that, but after our discussion with KEB on Monday, I should be in a better position to clarify the answer.
The reason I ask is some of those are hard purchases. I didn't know if they're time bound. I see the X-ray machine and things for building management, and I don't know when Rogers Group if they're time bound between now and the end of the year to commit to the purchase.
Well, I'll get back to you if there's a problem with that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, the next item.
By the way, I'm so sorry. Thank you very much for the follow-up on, I understand, public health in a Monday morning conference call, so that'd be on the 9th. And then we've just discussed the sheriff's items. Is what's up on the board, is the facilities department also included? There was a list, relatively short list from Ricky Sparks, where they were still, is that up on that chart?
There's 70,000 for building management, for miscellaneous expenses, remodels, and they're providing explanations to get that clarified, yes.
Okay.
There's
I
also
thought that there was, yes, right. I thought there were a couple of others.
county clerk payroll expenses and a portable x-ray machine that is for the coroner's office. So if there's anything else, I'm not aware of it at this point. But it's my understanding that our staff is working with KEB and their things are moving along as we expected with them. We don't have any bumps in the road that I'm aware of.
Okay. I would ask Chris Allen, if he's in the room, to follow up with whoever, John, you feel is appropriate. There was a list, and I'll pull that out from somewhere. But is Mr. Allen, is Chris Allen in the room?
He's
Or
not
on
in the
the
room.
phone?
No.
Okay. Okay. I'll follow up with Mr. Allen.
Okay. All right. As it relates then to where we're at with the program, we started out with $90+ million with the approvals that we've already received and the matters we've addressed today. That makes just shy of $60 million available for disbursement, subject to the intergovernmental agreements coming back. So our staff, together with the finance department and the treasurer and the auditor, can work toward making those disbursements to get those funds out to the parties that are entitled to the funds. There was a question asked previously, actually this issue seems to come up every meeting, is where are we at with the expenditures for time paid to date with our consultant. The feedback I received today was that as of the middle of October, the expenditures incurred to date were $83,000. So that was within the parameters of our agreement, and our process moves forward with them. If there's an issue with respect to the budget for those, certainly we'll make the committee aware as soon as possible. All right, the next item I wanted to talk about was the not-for-profit allocations, and maybe just as some background going into that, let's just talk about available funds in the contingency fund. Mr. Onzik handed out a sheet today that reflected the allocation and uses of funds that we've gone through so far. At the bottom of the sheet, there's roughly $3.8 million left in the contingency fund. In addition, the business grant program that we undertook so far had $8 million, excuse me, allocated to it. And as of today's meeting, there are only 980,000 of that has been approved for applications that were submitted. And so in terms of available funds, we have the unallocated portion of the business grant program, plus we have the 3.8 million roughly in funds that are here shown on the contingency fund list. And I say that just to provide some perspective for the next two items I want to discuss that were really business for today's meeting.
Don, could you point that out, where you're seeing these on the spreadsheet?
In the column at the top line, right next to the 9.2 million or $92 million number, there's contingency.
Right.
We started out with 5 million. There were deductions made from that, and the net of value or available balance is 3,788,000 down at the bottom.
I got that. You had mentioned the small business grant that only $1 million came out of the 8th.
Right.
Is that on the sheet?
That is not on the sheet.
Okay. That's
Okay.
okay.
All right, so there's two areas that I wanted to discuss and are appropriate to try to finish up now, or at least move forward on. The first is the not-for-profit grant programs. I know we have a sheet here. Fabiola, if you could please bring that up. We had allocated a sum of money to that program. Let me just see here.
There was a $2 million allocation.
$2 million allocation. We had applications that came in that exceeded that $2 million amount. There were a couple of allocations. When we created the, well, let's review this sheet to start with, and then I have some specific comments. Can you page down so we can see the entire screen? Okay, so the total applications requested 3,052,000. After going through the vetting process based on the criteria that we had established for the program, the available for funding was 2,159,000. That was what was approved. Now, the most significant items that were not approved relate to one specific type of application, and that is for the homeless shelters. Can you page up a little bit so we can see the Hesed House application? All right, this is item 20 on the sheet. Public Action to Deliver Shelter, Inc., DBA Hesed House. They had made a request for $790,588, and the amount that was deemed eligible based on our criteria shows 0, and there's a specific reason for that. When we created the criteria for this, we had included a health-related requirement, mental health-related requirement, or homelessness, but we also included emphasis on rent, mortgage payment, utilities, shelter costs, things of that nature that were not necessarily capital in nature. And the basis for the application for Hesed House dealt with reconfiguring and improving a facility so that more people could be housed, and that those people that were being housed could be spread out more to deal with the COVID situation. So because that was more of a capital improvement type project, it didn't fit within the specific criteria. So one way to address that, I know I've talked to a number of the board members and the members of this committee about that request, and really the spirit of this in the beginning was to deal with the homeless shelters as a priority, is we could move to amend our criteria to include expenditures that are of the type that were requested for reimbursement by then. One of the questions is if we did that, will that fall within the federal guidelines? And the state's attorney's office has provided the opinion that it would. And so I know that there was a push to provide funding. As one individual, I would be supportive of doing that. What we could do is move to amend the criteria under the not-for-profit program to include costs for, and maybe Fabiola, you could give us an example of language that we could use, but
The Treasury language specifically says expenses for care for homeless populations provided to mitigate COVID-19 effects and enable compliance with COVID-19 public health precautions.
all right, so we could put that cited language in there.
Yes.
And if that language was added to our program criteria, then this application would be modified, or the recommendation would be modified to include that 790 as an
Correct.
approved amount.
Correct.
All right. Mr. Surgis?
Just my question would be, first, my comment would be, I am all in favor of this. But my question is, does this open a Pandora's box with anybody else on that list that may have said, well, gosh, we didn't put in for that because we thought it was, have you seen any of that, or is?
No, and it really, ultimately, you have the decision to approve all of these applications. So if you wanted to change and include, we would allow it into the program.
For this isolated one for Hesed, I would motion that we approve
All right,
that.
so Mr. Surgis moves that we modify our criteria to include the language that was articulated by Fabiola at our meeting today. Is there a second? Mr. Hanson moves or seconds that. Any discussion, Mr. Fraz?
I'm just thinking, our request, we had $2 million in the pot for nonprofits, and the requests were 3 million something. You know, obviously I don't have access to all the applications, but assuming all these nonprofits are doing good things for the county and its residents, could we take some of the contingency money and just fund the whole?
That was going to be my next item for discussion. I think if we modify the criteria, then, Mark, could you please page down again to the bottom? If we added that 780, that would make it roughly 2,920,000, whatever that number is, that was eligible. And what we could do, so yes, then we can consider that.
Yeah, I
because-
mean, when we started this program, we were taking kind of shots in the dark. You know, for example, the fire districts, we had to make an educated guess on
Right.
what we thought they might ask for. So knowing what we know now, they're certainly within the boundaries of being able to fully fund it. I would like to bring up, most of us got a request in the email from a late arrival, the Air Classics Museum down at Aurora Airport. They're asking for only $8,165. I'm just wondering if we could also add them to the list, provided they filled out an application at some point. Is that possible?
All right, why don't we just deal with if we can deal with this incrementally, we certainly can address that concern or that recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, my question for Drew would be, it seems like there's only 3 of them that didn't get their full funding request.
That could be another issue too. Let's
But
deal
was
with the
that
motion.
because
that's
they didn't qualify, or we were trying to stay under a cap?
No, it's just they didn't have eligible expenses.
Right.
See that, okay.
All right, so the motion on the floor is to modify the permissible language to include the specific language that was quoted from the federal guidelines. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that motion?
Yes, I have a question on, I understand that the state's attorney's office approves on eligibility. Does KEB approve as far as eligibility? I understand that we're putting this in, SAO is in, is KEB, does KEB approve?
The only way the state's attorney signs off on these applications is after KEB's review.
So the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, these, I should have pointed that out. These have already gone through the analysis by a KEB, and this is coming back to us with their recommendation as bolstered and presented by the state's attorney's office. So, all right, we have a motion and a second. Any further
Mr.
discussion?
Chairman, this is Deborah Allen. May I ask a question?
Yes.
On the Lazarus House request, I'm new to seeing this spreadsheet, so I may be asking inappropriate questions. But if it looked like Lazarus House had asked for more than was approved, and I was just wondering if Lazarus House would now fall into the criteria if we changed it as we did for Hesed House.
We would have to review it again after the CAC and the county board have amended the resolution to include that specific language.
It's possible. It's their request was slightly different than what Hesed House had proposed, but that's something we can take into consideration.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there's still the issue of the Northern Illinois Food Bank. They had wanted to amend their application.
All right. Well, again, we keep jumping ahead. The issue on the floor right now is modifying the criteria to allow the homeless shelter request to include the additional language, or to add our program to include that language. So any further discussion on that item? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Hanson, yes.
Kenyon, Fraz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That motion carries. Now, the next discussion is the grant total, the total amount requested right now or deemed eligible with the modification that we just talked about is roughly 2.9 million. That's the amount that is eligible. What we could do in light of Mrs. Allen's request, if the broadening of the language would include the funding of the Hesed House request, we could simply make a motion to increase the funding for nonprofits from the 2 million original amount to 3,052,000, the total amount requested, and then we could evaluate that after we have that one request vetted. Is there a motion to do that?
Could we add that one I brought up? That one additional?
Modify this one.
All right. All right, so let's back up then on that issue. Mr. Fraz has a request to add one additional not-for-profit entity. Now, remember when we had the criteria for the not-for-profit applications, we had a requirement of mental health or health-related, and if we're going to bring in somebody other than that, then that raises the question of not just their eligibility, but entities like other entities that have been here before for us. Aurora University was one. The history museums, I've gotten calls from some of them as well. So, and again, they're all worthy. Those are all entities that we've provided grants to over the years through Riverboat. But I think if we're going to consider that, then we've got to look at other options as well.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just thinking, my goal today is get as much of the way through this money as we can. And so if we have to create another pot for the various museums and historical things, we could do that. This might fit that. So that would be an option later in the meeting.
Okay.
So I'll withdraw it.
All right, so is there a motion to increase the funding allocation for the not-for-profit pool by I'll just round this to $1,050,000, by $1,050,000, and to come from the contingency fund?
Sanchez moves.
Moved by Mr. Fraz. Sanchez, Mr. Sanchez, was that you that seconded?
Yes.
Okay. Any discussion?
My hand was up before Sanchez.
All right.
No, I'm joking. I'm
Okay.
totally joking.
I
All
didn't
right.
see it.
Yes. All right, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Hanson, yes.
Kenyon, Fraz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
All right, that motion carries. And then as it relates to then, well, inherent in that motion then was increasing the, well, we could do this as a separate motion or we can combine the two. But ultimately then we would move this list on for approval to the full board.
With the exception of the Northern Illinois Food Bank, who wants to amend their application.
All right, now we need to talk about that one. All right, so let's talk about Northern Illinois Food Bank. Northern Illinois Food Bank had made an original request for $642,000. They apparently received funding for a portion of what they requested from another source, or their fiscal year ended and they didn't want to include a portion of that in their request. And so they asked that they be able to modify their request, not for the purpose of increasing the amount sought, but to substitute other expenses that they deemed qualified under the program for funding. Now, we did vet their original request. That went through our consultant and our staff, and that came back approved. Since that time, they've sent a request to substitute other expenses, which would have to go through the vetting process, but assume that those other expenses would have qualified as well. What's the will of the committee to allow that substitution at this point? I'm seeing nods of heads. Is that, do we need a formal motion to, I'll entertain a motion to allow Northern Illinois Food Bank to modify their request as
So moved.
submitted. That's Mr. Surges moves, Mr. Fraz seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Hanson, yes.
Kenyon, Fraz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
All right, that motion carries. And so if, I want to ask this question of staff. If we move to approve then the applications as outlined here with the increased dollar amount, and we put on the board for approval, board meeting for approval in November, would we have time between now and then to vet the two items that we just talked about, the additional expenses from Northern Illinois Food Bank and the Lazarus House expenses?
Yes, I can make that request and have them expedited.
All right, that'd be fine. All right, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the outline of not-for-profit applications as modified in this meeting to be presented to the full board. Mr. Fraz moves. Mr. Surges seconds. Any discussion?
When will the board consider this?
As soon as you send me your application, I will have it reviewed and then sent on.
The board, the action that we're taking is a resolution that we would submit to the full board for consideration at next Tuesday's meeting.
Next Tuesday. Okay, great.
Subject to being modified depending on what information changes hands between now and then, but that
Okay.
would be the plan.
And Fabiola, you have our revised application. So if you need any other information, let me know.
Please send it again.
Ooh.
Okay.
Thank you.
May I ask? This is where the amount of the request is not being asked to be increased. It's just that we're dividing among the allocation to different line items. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. Correct.
That is correct.
Thank you.
All right, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Hanson, yes.
Kenyon, Braz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Yes.
Your name.
Yes, Kenyon.
Okay,
Mr.
gotcha.
Kenyon, it's good to hear you, your voice. All right, that motion carries. All right, so now that is another significant hurdle with our not-for-profit, subject to some fine-tuning of documentation. We can hopefully have a finally approved program and applications at our board meeting coming up. All right, then the final item for discussion is the business grant program. And I want to lead into this a little bit, and this is really a follow-up to the commitment we made at the executive committee meeting today that Dr. Iqbal raised, but also this is an issue that a number of committee members have talked about with me as well. When we started our original business grant program, we did so using criteria that were established based on some of the programs at other counties. And that process has moved forward somewhat methodically, in part due to the level of sophistication of the applicants, but also in part due to the stringent nature of the criteria that we established, not arbitrarily, but I think the purpose was to try to make sure that the funds were allocated to the entities that were entitled to receive the funds and to avoid either misrepresentation or misuse of funds or misallocation of funds. Now that program is moving forward. To date, there's $980,000 plus or minus that's been tentatively approved. And in terms of, and I know a number of you have been contacted by individual applicants. I can assure you that for each call you've received, I've probably received more, and the nature of the calls are all legitimate. Some was misinformation, but some was, legitimate concerns that we had set a criteria of $2.5 million in revenue. We had applicants that had $2,550,000 in revenue, and so they felt that that was unfair. Some of them missed the deadline for filing. They asked that we extend the time frame to do that. Some didn't maintain the records with the level of sophistication or detail as required by our application process. And the list goes on. And some people claim they didn't know about the program or that that it wasn't properly advertised. And obviously we're human here, we do our best, but no program is perfect. A couple things, though, have changed since we implemented that program. We know that the COVID situation is recurred in a significant way, such that the governor is elected to use his authority to close businesses down. When we didn't necessarily anticipate that was going to happen. And so we have a new round of hardship for our businesses that is being experienced. And so it gives us an opportunity, if we can, within a limited time frame, to reallocate some of the funds to a different type of program that would try to, in a more simple way, address the needs of our businesses that have been impacted. Now, one of the concerns that I had when we talked about doing this would be the administration of a program like this. I know that the state's attorney's office with KEB is in the process of doing or finishing up what we had tasked them with, and is working with the staff to get through the county projects this next week. In the meantime, I did talk to Mr. Berger, who is the office has administered grant programs before. And we did some research in terms of what other entities are doing to address this concern. DuPage County created an emergency business grant program, allocated funding to that, and had some very simple criteria for what the qualification would be for that program. I believe the state, through the DECA program, also had a similar grant program that was outlined that, again, met the needs of small businesses or entities that have been adversely affected. And all this was done within the approved criteria under the federal regulations. So I believe what Dr. Iqbal's comment was, or suggestion was, is that we modify our existing program. And my suggestion is going to be that we consider leaving our current program in place that's going through the process. It'll be, we have some grants that are approved or that are going through the approval process, but that we consider establishing a new emergency program that would be established by our staff with and vetted and processed through Mr. Berger's office, and with oversight, of course, by everyone else that's involved, the state's attorney's office and the treasurer's office and the auditor. But we would establish some criteria, and the question was, you know, how do we go into this in a way that will accomplish what we want and at the same time be effective? And in discussing this earlier with staff today, there were some suggestion that we establish as a committee just some very basic outline for the program, and then have them work to establish a written outline for the program that we could submit to the board for approval. And the criteria, and these are just a list of some of the items that I had written down as we went through this discussion after our meeting this morning. The criteria would be that, first of all, we'd have to establish a dollar amount, a gross dollar amount that we wanted to allocate to this program. Second would be that in terms of qualification, it would be an entity that was required to be closed by the government or by the governor's order. So someone that wasn't able to operate. The list of eligible expenses would be the same as what we had talked before in the Treasury regulations: wages, rent, supplies, lost food or equipment or materials, and utilities. And then the issue is, what are the types of entities that would be qualifying for this? Would it, you know, there was some indication of limiting it to restaurants and catering and bar establishments. There was also discussion about including entertainment venues that had to be closed, such as the Paramount was an example of one. But I think the spirit of the program was, at least in DuPage, was to deal primarily with what we read about in the paper about that's being litigated right now, the issue of our service businesses like bars and restaurants being forced to be closed. And then we would want to come up with a dollar amount for the eligible grant criteria. So if we're going to get this done, we need to be able to keep it simple. We need to agree on the basic concepts and then allow our staff to come up with a formal framework for it that we can approve. So first of all, I'd like to just get the sense from the committee that this is something we're interested in recommending to the board. I think everyone that I talked to is in favor of that. Mr. Fraz?
Yeah, my question is, I'm definitely in favor of it. We do have the $8 million that we allotted for small business, so would it come out of that?
Right. Well, right now we've got $1 million that's been $980,000 that's been allocated for funding. Fabiola, do you want to address that?
So there's $4,130,000 available that's been unawarded through this program, but I also want to bring to the attention of the CAC that this program itself, as it's running, is going to mirror the same issues you're going to have with a new program, and that is the sophistication of the applicant. We need to change the criteria of the financials. We've been asking for 18 months worth of financials. We need to concentrate that to the 2020 financial loss. You need to show that there is a loss of revenue. Also,
and so I guess what I'm thinking is that those are issues that, excuse me, we would certainly include in the program detail that would be put together with recommendations of staff between now and our meeting at which we approve the concept.
I'm also asking that you consider that now, simply because the level of information is not there, and the non-compliance will kick these applicants out, which will increase the pool amount.
All right. I think we first have to agree conceptually to do the program, and then we can work on the parameters. But I want to do it at the committee level right now, and then we'll deal with it internally with staff as to how we staff this and get it vetted.
For this new program?
Yes.
I'm talking about the one I have right now.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about this new program.
Okay, let's talk about the program
All right.
first.
Mr. Hanson?
They go hand in hand. I just heard the number 4.1 million. I also heard the number 980,000 earlier. What has been approved through our current program? What has not been vetted yet for a possible remainder of the 8 million that we originally allocated?
I have 94 applications that are about $1.5 million in eligible expenses. Out of those, 250, 50 fell off for some variation of non-compliance, missed deadlines, so on and so forth. The remaining 100 plus are in limbo for that simple reason that I don't have the financials to review them. And that's what I need. That is a criteria set by the CAC, and I need those before I can vet them further.
So just so we're clear on Matt, because I have the same exact question. It's not 8 million minus 1 million and we have 7 million. You already have stuff that's in the pipeline and we're down to 4 point something million. Okay. I had the same exact.
Without an exact number of those pending applicants that we're waiting financials on, do you know what the total should
No.
they? Okay.
All right. Mr. Surgis.
Don, Mr. Chairman, I've had a handful of people that have reached out and I've tried to email back saying they received a decline letter. Just, you don't qualify. Have a great day. Nothing more, no details. You didn't miss this, you didn't miss that. You're just declined. I've challenged them to say, I don't buy that. I think you would have received more information.
That's it. Given the number of applications and all the other moving parts of the program, your
It's just
application has been declined. Yes.
Okay, I mean, before we open this up to somebody else, my thought would be to make some effort to reach out to those that were declined and find out why.
Again, no financials.
Just financials.
Most of them are no financials, missed deadlines, non-compliance to cure the financial deficit.
Okay. Again, if we're going to try and open this up to a whole nother group of people, if these people had it in, but they missed the deadline to get their financials in, I would like to see an extension for those people into the new program. Am I making sense?
Or they could reapply in the new program and submit a shortened version.
That would be, thank you. As long as that's acceptable to do. You know what I mean? You can't reapply because you applied the first time, you're out. No, you reapplied, you were declined because you didn't have your stuff in. Yes, you can reapply. That would be acceptable to me.
You're also running the risk of frustrating the applicant. The applicant does not understand what's being asked of them. You ask them to submit again, their head's going to explode.
Oh, it exploded on me. So, yeah, we're getting exploded on. And
I get it all.
I know, and
the
then we call
time.
you and then you just double explosion. So, I mean, we're all on the same team. We're just trying to help them out. As long as you're saying they could reapply for the second round, all in favor.
All right. Let's, why don't we focus on this program that we're talking about, this new program that we're considering here. What are the entities you want to include in that program?
Well, if we're going to, and I agree, I really hate the thought of pushing those people off to the side. So if we're going to do that, we really have to open it up to any business.
Right.
We can't just make it restaurants and bars. So at this point, if we're going to do it, I would just call it a second round and we open up to any business. The one thing I would mention, I've talked talk to you about this, is the, whatever you want to call it, large live venue facilities. We've only got a handful. But if you look at the Paramount, the Arcada Theater in St. Charles, maybe the Hemmons in Elgin, I can't think of any others. Maybe they're there. But, you know, they may have to have a different dollar, you know, max dollar. I mean, those entities might be worthy of 250,000 versus a small business that we might cap at 25. So we may just have to have two levels or something within the program, or just do that separately.
All right, so if we were to, just to try to give some shape to this, establish a new program that theoretically would be simpler in criteria, would be a business that operates in Kane County that was closed due to the government's shutdown and had expenses that met the criteria that we had: wages, rent, supplies, whatever, utilities. And we made that program with the concept of a $25,000 limit. Would that framework be adequate for this group to consider? Mr. Hanson?
Just two thoughts on that. We did not include wages in our first round to try to avoid the possibility of an entity that receives something PPP-wise. We did not have wages the first go-around. I'd suggest we stay with that plan again. And I also wanted to echo the sentiments of Mr. Fraz, and I think you can make the entertainment venue, the banquet venue, almost like a separate small category, kind of like we did with the libraries. I can think of others too, your traditional banquet halls that have been they've been starving all summer long with no graduations, no weddings, no baptisms, no nothing.
All right, so is the consensus that we would eliminate wages from the reimbursable expenses? All right.
They weren't included before.
All right. And we said that it would be $25,000 for any business, with the exception of businesses that were, well, let's just talk about that. Why don't we leave the Paramount and the other out of this discussion? Mr. Berger, you've been listening to this. Are the criteria detailed enough to allow you to work with staff to formulate a program that we could implement and get processed and vetted?
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do is work with the state's attorney's office as well as KEB on some of the feedback you've given us this morning and explore the feasibility of this kind of program. Maybe discuss with Fabiola some of the challenges of working with the current pool of applicants, and try to come back with a recommendation that would make it as easy as possible for the applicant pool to avail themselves of the program.
Is that something that if we tasked you to do, that you could come back and we could have a resolution for our board to approve at the meeting next week?
I'd like to come back to you with some recommendations for which ultimately could be incorporated into a resolution.
All right, well.
So for example, just off the cuff, you just established a $25,000 limit. So I would wonder, do you want the existing pool of applicants that are only accessing $20,000 to be eligible to come back and ask for an additional $5,000?
No, I think this is a new program going forward. That program exists. It has its own life. And then this program is a new program dealing with the circumstances that have arisen that weren't really contemplated when the original program was vetted.
I would just like an opportunity to talk with the state's attorney and KEB about those.
If we're going to implement, all right, so here's the elephant in the room. All right, it's November 4th. If we're going to establish a program, we have to establish the program. We've got to open it up for applications. We have to vet the applications. We've got to get the money out the door this year. how long is it going to take to get the outline for a program together that we can approve?
I think we could get something to you next week after we have some discussion.
Can we have it by the board meeting?
That would be a challenge.
If we just extended the existing program, does that create any hardship? Would that be faster?
I would defer to Fabiola.
No, I'm going to recommend that we don't do that.
I never said that.
All right. I just think given the
Wasn't even thinking about it.
it's a good question, but to modify what we have in existence right now is probably, we're better off to start fresh.
Well, but I thought I understood from the discussion that there's an interest in facilitating some of the applicant pool that is working with the state's attorney's office now toward this other initiative so that they can take advantage of it. There's an interest in reaching back out perhaps to those that were
Well, if there's
denied.
recommendations regarding modifying the existing program based on your discussion, we can do that as well to simplify those going through those
Yep.
applications.
I'm just asking for us to have a chance to have some conversation, troubleshoot the idea. I'll come back, with some corrective ideas for you to consider.
Right. It's just a function of time. We need to, having a special board meeting given COVID is not an easy thing to do.
We'll work as quickly as we can.
When's the next board meeting?
Tuesday. So
what we're proposing, just so I'm clear, and that's kind of what I came into this meeting kind of thinking about, is kind of a two-prong attack, maybe easing some of the restrictions on the current applicants to try and move them along. Is that right? And then starting this separate program.
Right.
So two-prong attack to try and get this out to the business.
And then this, again, is in terms of resolutions for the agenda, we would have a placeholder on there for modifications to our existing business grant program, allocating additional funds, and establishing this new program. What about the criteria for the venues that we talked about? Is it going to be 25,000 or?
I don't think 25,000, 25,000 to a small struggling business could make all the difference in the world, but to the Paramount, I think because there's so few of those, if we're all imagining the same type of venue, there's only 3 or so in the county. I'd almost like to see a separate pot of money, whatever the amount, but say you put $1 million in a separate pot of money to make available to those, and but I would say those could go up to $250,000 because they've literally been shut. There's no outside seating. There's no occasional this or occasional that, and most of those venues have a hard time paying the bills as it was. So it's just something I think we should think about. If we're trying to get this money out, we certainly don't want to send any of it back to the state. So if we could set a separate pot of money for that, and I'd also say we should consider thinking about a smaller pot of money for historical organizations, say for example 250,000 total, where they could request up to 25,000 or whatever the amount is, 10,000. But are we in a position where we could make new pots of money, buckets of money?
Only 4 million left from this.
Yeah. So what's going to happen to that? It's
I forgot. That's
November.
the pot that you have to draw from.
Okay, so I'm saying
Here's what we got. We got 4 million left in the business grant program. We also have about 2.8 million or 2.7 million in the contingency fund. So we could combine those two, again, by setting aside pots of money in specific programs. I would say maybe I don't, if we don't have enough applicants, then we're going to have money left over again, and we're going to be back here again. So maybe the pooled concept would make sense. I just, let's talk. The consensus of the committee was $25,000 for businesses. Is that accurate?
Yes.
What is it for other venues? Mr. Hanson suggested 100,000.
And I do concur with Drew's idea of, I'd propose $4 million tailored towards what seems to be at the front end of this discussion, being more of a service industry and hospitality industry program, and a separate $1 million set aside for entertainment venues, banquet facilities, businesses of that nature, with their grant being up to $100,000. They weren't included in our, realistically, based on what we heard from the Paramount and from other entities, they were not eligible in the first round of our program.
All right. Is that, so that would be an allocation of a combined total of $5 million that we would allocate to that program. I would say at this point in time, given the contingency fund, we may want to bump that business grant to 5 million, because we could use the remaining money in the business program plus try to absorb the rest of the contingency fund.
So just so I understand, the venues then would be incorporated into the business area?
No, the venues would be separate. It'd be $1 million for venues / banquet facilities, and then 5 million for businesses.
I mean, the nature of their expenses wouldn't be any different when you're applying. It's just a matter of your qualifications for.
Right, and if we get over applied on the business side and we are under applied on the venue side, then we can reallocate money to fill those.
So we had
grants.
a limit before of 250,000 of revenues. Are we advancing?
2.5 or what it was.
For small businesses, 2.5 million in gross sale.
No, we're eliminating that now, I guess, right? Is that?
Yes, I think so.
Yep.
And I bring that up because, again, Santa's Village is in my neighborhood. They were the first ones in line saying, hey, we were above that threshold last year. We're not open this year.
Right.
You don't understand. Could they reapply as a venue, entertainment venue?
They would qualify probably as we got to figure out the business criteria, but they would qualify as a business, obviously.
But if, I threw out 250, but maybe Matt's correct. If we made it 100,000, the universe I was thinking about was much smaller. I was thinking about the Paramount and the Hemmons and the Arcata. But if we open it up to banquet facilities and whatever you want to call Santa's Village, an entertainment venue, then we're going to have a larger universe to draw from. And I think the 100,000 would be a fair limit.
Mr. Chairman, this is Ms. Thomas. I have a question.
You disappeared on us.
Yes, I'm sorry. My apologies. I didn't want to interrupt me.
I'm just kidding. No, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
So I certainly, we should certainly do everything we can to help as many businesses in the county as we can. But we know that we're running out of time. We know that advertising is getting the word out has been a problem. It will continue to be a problem. And then, of course, just getting documentation and all of those challenges. So I just want to remind the committee that at the top of our meeting, we heard about a request from the county for, to assist with eviction mitigation. And while, I definitely want to see the Paramount in Aurora and all the other entertainment venues reopen, we can't use these funds to replace lost revenue. They're not open, how much can go towards salary. So if we can move this money around where needed, I urge the committee to think about what was presented with respect to helping landlords who are business owners and of course families, residents who will be facing eviction.
And we didn't hear a number, a dollar request. Is that what you got there?
John, this is your meeting, but I would love to hear that.
Let me just say this, in all due respect, and I have ultimate respect for the courts and the Chief Judge, both Chief Judge Hull and former Chief Judge Bowles. if this program was going to come forward, I would have expected that we would have been vetted through Judiciary Committee and brought to us. I understand what the program is, but we need to have something in place. I know that evictions have been put on hold, so there aren't evictions happening now by virtue of the supreme being who decided that, notwithstanding the fact that we have a free society, we're going to close the courts down to certain people for certain reasons. So as a practical matter, and this is more of a political statement than dealing with the concern, we already have a subsidized program for people that are in eviction situations. They can't be evicted. But in terms of the program and how it would process, I would think that it would come through a committee, and given the time frame we've got, I can't see practically establishing that program with the number of applicants and the dollar amounts involved, how that would be processed so it could be vetted and dispersed this calendar year. That's the challenge we've got, and where does the money go and who gets the money and that kind of thing. So, you know, obviously it's the board's decision as to whether they want to entertain a program like that. The program has merits. I thought one of the flaws in the original PPP program was there wasn't any compensation or benefit to landlords. It was all to the tenants who were the business occupants, and then they were given money for rent, and there was no guarantee the money was used for rent. So anyway, that's just my personal feeling on it. I think the goal is to try to get a program in place to invest these funds. If I would say this meeting is not a meeting at which we're going to fill out or figure out the criteria for an eviction assistance program. If the board said that that was the board's priority, or this committee wanted to make that a priority, I'd say let's set another meeting tomorrow, Monday, whatever, to talk about that and figure out what that program would look like and how it would get administered within the time frame we have left. So that's just my personal thought on it, given where we're at. All right, so Ms. Thomas's recommendation is that, notwithstanding the outline we put in for these this business grant program, that she would prefer funding the eviction program.
I just think that there's some real challenges to getting money to businesses for authorized purposes, and by December 30th. I mean, so I think we need to hear from Mr. Berger's office first before we can really make any decision.
Scott, do you want to address the committee? I mean, if we were able to establish a program and put it in place and get it approved in fairly short order, do you see a problem with allocating or obtaining applicants for the funds that we've discussed allocating?
I suppose there's a possibility of that. I mean, I think hearing from Fabiola over the last few weeks, it's been difficult to work with some of the businesses that don't have the sophistication of having all the different bits of information available so they can submit them. However, I would speculate that most of the expenses that you would be covering might very well be reimbursement of expenses that go back to March. So it's cutting it close, obviously, to allow that process to drift, deep into November, but it's not impossible, in my opinion.
All right, well, what's the will of the committee?
So trying to put everything in perspective the way I see it, we're going to go back to the small businesses, see if we can maybe modify some of the criteria to move some of the already applied for businesses through the program. That's step A. Step B with businesses is to create the new program. And then we discussed I guess what I'm not clear on is within the business program, are we going to have this venue option, or is that going to be a separate program?
There was a discussion about setting aside 5 million for business grants and $1 million for the venues.
Okay.
And the limits would be $25,000 for businesses and $100,000 for venues.
Could we do the 250 for the historical agencies?
We can,
I know we're talking about a lot of stuff here, but it's November, and I think the more we have targets for this money to get through in the next few weeks, the better.
there's a consensus of the committee to include historic entities for 250, up to 250, or is that
250,000 total, and 10,000 maximum individual agency.
All right, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I know this is at the will of the CAC committee. At the 25,000 maximum grant amount for the second round, do any of the committee members feel that there would be an alienation of the folks who applied in the first small business grant program who are capped at 20,000? Just a thought of, there's going to be there's that pool of 251 applicants who came in. Theirs was 20. They could feel that, they went through the different rounds, and then the second folks, which, whether it's a good or not good, that's at 25,000. Would the original 251 who performed against the other rules feel alienated?
My perspective is we have the original applications that are going through the process. Those will get vetted and approved. This is a new round of grants for a newly incurred devastation to the business. So I would say that those entities could be part of the applicant pool again to qualify. So we don't have that issue. If they didn't apply the first time, then they didn't apply. But now we're broadening the scope to include other entities that could apply. So they wouldn't have that issue. All right, well, here's what I'm going to do. I think we've got concepts here. We need to get something put in writing that.
Do we have a motion or no?
It was for consensus, John was asking.
Yeah, just a consensus. So what I'll do is work with the staff at the direction of the committee to put a program together, or at least the basics for a program that with the goal of having a resolution that we could submit to the board for consideration on Tuesday. Now, it may require some additional work and some additional meetings, and I'm prepared to do that if that's
The three things we're discussing is 10,000, 25,000, and 100,000 for the three different groups.
I don't remember what the 10,000 was for.
No.
For the historical.
Museum, historical.
Right.
Historical group to 25,000 for the new business thing and 100,000 for the larger venue.
And I would just like to say too, I think it's a good, John, I appreciate you trying to clear things up and give us a clear direction. My priorities are to keep the application as simple as possible, one page. I haven't looked at it, but another business told me that there's a state program called the BIG grants, and it's an online application. They said it takes like 15 minutes. So maybe we could look at that to get some inspiration, but I don't want to scare people off because I had a lot of people that came to me and said, I looked at it and I just couldn't get through it, especially the audited financial request and some other things. So keep it simple. And then the other thing we have to do is get the word out. I think our first round, it was a complicated application and we counted on some help getting the word out, and it just didn't happen. So I really think the county board members need to step up. If we provide them with the ammunition, which we did on the last thing as far as a flyer, I handed out 50 of them to businesses, but I think a lot of the board members didn't know about it. So we have to get our board members out there to shake the tree and notify businesses in their district. And lastly, I just want to be sure, because it seems like I haven't interacted with staff very much, but I know that they're under a lot of pressure to get things done. If we have to get some more staff, whether it's just borrowing from other departments or hiring temps, I think we need to do it. So I just, I don't want them to be so overwhelmed that they can't take a phone call or something. So appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about marketing, advertising, any new program we put out there. What is the schedule? And this is really for Chairman Lawson, if he's still on the line. What is the schedule for Kane County Connect? Because that's our main vehicle for getting any news out. So where will we be able to use that through December 30th?
Kane County Connects is funded through November 30th of this year.
November 30th. Okay.
But he could get 3 blasts out on this in, 4 days. I mean.
Right. We've got to establish the program before we can advertise it, though. So I'll work on that. Is there any other business for the meeting?
Yes, please. There's one, John, when you refer to the distribution of funds, I think that you accurately call it dispersing the money, because it does actually have to go out. I might just be misunderstanding. Our staff, Faviola's referred to it earlier as obligating. I think that that's like an accrual. I mean, that's a term of art among accountants, as you know, as a CPA. So obligated is not the same thing as actually dispersed. One is cash accounting, and I understand the provision about subrecipients, but I think that we need to get an agreement that the true deadline of dispersing and having this these activities stood up and funded is not sometime in January. It really is a hard deadline of December 30th. If I'm wrong about that, actually that is one of the few. I think actually it's one of the 3 things in the early criteria that we have to meet, and so it's
Right,
not
so-
obligated. Obligated means accrued.
No, my understanding is, and my goal is to have that accomplished. We've got 60 million roughly that's ready to go out right now. The big portion of that goes to the county, but to our municipalities as well. And so we're going to get that out the door, and we're going to work to accelerate everything else. We got the not-for-profits approved. If we can get that and get that out the door, then what we're going to deal with primarily is the business grant program. So, yes, I understand your concern, Chairman. I think one other issue that I want to at least broach the subject on now, thinking ahead because time flies, is that come December, we're going to have 3 members of this committee that won't be board members anymore. And so what we also need to do in terms of housekeeping is to have other board members willing to step up in terms of committing to assist the committee in finishing its work. Hopefully by the end of my term, we will have allocated all the funds and committed all the funds, and December will be for disbursement. But that's just food for thought here going forward. I mean, I'm available to help as a citizen, but I don't want to dump the responsibility on somebody, but that's my goal. To your point about disbursement, is to have everything understood by the end of my term so that we can just deal with the month of December in terms of writing checks or doing wire transfers. All right, if there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Chairman Hoshite Sanchez here.
Oh, yes, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you. And I don't know if this would be appropriate to discuss here, but in relation to the small business grant program, there was one thing we had criteria about being in good standing with the state. And I don't know what all of the criteria is included in that as far as like, is it taxes or not? But I know there was a business that reached out and they weren't able to, they didn't have the money to buy their LLC license to renew it for this year. And so they weren't eligible.
$75?
I don't know what license they were referring to. They had mentioned it was $500.
Okay.
So I can
All right,
find
so you know that being in good standing, if we're going to pay money to an entity, the entity technically has to be in good standing to, if it's presented as an LLC or a corporation. I know the state has stopped accepting renewals or renewals of corporate licenses or LLC annual reports if there's money owed to the state for back taxes or other things. So that could have been the situation that this individual has dealt with. But if it's a corporate applicant, just as a matter of law, in order to do business with that entity, it's got to be in good standing. But we can, I'll take a look at that, Jared, and see how we can address that in this program. All right.
Okay, I appreciate that. And if there's any help that you guys need in between now and next Tuesday to get things moving, just, keep me in mind. You got my number.
All right. What other, okay, so staff wants to address the committee. Michelle, did you have something?
Sorry. Just to clarify, I know we are going to meet with you to talk about a new program. If the committee would also entertain our meeting with you to present a resolution next Tuesday's board meeting to propose some modifications to the current small business program to sort of streamline that process.
That was understood, yes.
That would be fantastic. I know that Fabiola has spoken with KEB to try to get some proposals in place to streamline the process to get more money out the door.
All right. All right, so that will be part and parcel of those discussions. Okay. Anything else from staff?
I can propose those changes right now if you'd like to consider them, or we can put it in an email. And the reason I say that is these applications are sitting there and I can cure them if we can make those changes. Otherwise, they will be rejected for non-compliance.
All right, we're going to have to formally approve them, but if you want to outline those, we can get a consensus as to whether.
So the issue again is getting these financials back. The 18 months, I'm suggesting that we do January 1st, 2020 through September 2020. That's about 9 months worth of financials that I think is easier to comply with. And also I'm asking that we process those that are affected by the shutdown, the restaurants, the bars. I can process those first. I don't have an issue with modifying my review process to address those further and push those out the door first. Also, with that being said, their requests do exceed the $20,000 limit, so they can do it in one fall swoop. So if you're considering them to apply for another program, they are eligible for the remainder of the year. Again, I'm asking that they submit that request with supporting documentation, leases, proof of payment, so that we can get them out the door faster.
All right, I think the first request you made was to just submit finances for 2020. The challenge with that is that we had a two-tiered grant system. One was for $20,000 if they had been in business since January of 2019, and a $10,000 for anyone that started business in 2020.
Yes.
So how are you going to reconcile those if we just?
So that would be with the tax return and also with whatever financials they can provide. That's what we're going to request of them. So with those businesses that are newer, that would fall under the 10,000, they get a very specific request.
I understand we're trying to simplify the program. To Mr. Fraz's comment about prioritizing. I think we should get staff together that we need, if it's got to be temps or someone to help us get the pipeline moved through more quickly if we can. I can't believe that someone, this is the issue. The reason we set financial criteria in the original application process was to avoid fraud.
Yes.
And if a business can't put together a financial statement from a profit and loss, I mean, the simple tax return is a profit and loss statement, and it's very crude, this form. If they can't produce a tax return, that's a challenge. And I think, ultimately, if we're providing funds to entities and we get audited as to whether we use the money appropriately, if we have recipients that weren't genuine businesses, then that puts a challenge on us. So that's something we got to keep in mind. So I would say that let me spend the next day or two with you and staff to try to figure out where we're going. And I'd say we hold off on modifications at this point.
Okay, and as far as help, I'm not sure what help the program would need. So these applications have all been vetted. They are going through, at least through the program, they're going through the financial vetting by the consultant. So at this point, it's just a matter of the applicant becoming compliant with that request. So I'm not sure what other help would be
All
necessary.
right, well, then I'm confused because you suggested that if we gave you the direction, you would put the restaurants at the front of the line.
It's
If
just
they're all through the system, why does someone have to go to the front of the line?
It's just prioritize it. If you want to prioritize them, I can do that. It's just a matter of manipulating the Excel.
Let's have a discussion with staff, and then we can bring back a formal recommendation to the committee as to what we want to do. All right?
Mr. Chairman, some of the help might be as simple as, rather than a decline letter, maybe we just have somebody say, all right, first off, you're not even in the ballpark, or, oh my gosh, you just didn't do this.
Right.
If you do this, you'd be in compliance.
That email does go out.
It does.
It does go out. I try to give them a chance to cure that application. If I see that they've submitted a significant amount of information that I can work off of, I will send them that email.
Okay.
And if they don't respond,
The one that was sent to me just says, you're just, based on the information we received, you're declined.
they can also email and ask, and I can send them exactly what
Okay.
happened.
All right. Is there any other business today, Mr. Frost?
I'll make the motion to adjourn, but I just want to say thanks for trying to, it's been a long meeting, but we had to do this. I think we made a lot of progress, and I appreciate you trying to wrangle the cats today.
There's going to be, I would envision another meeting next week, and maybe even a special board meeting if we have to come up with a program. But, and staff's willingness to help, I know that they've, again, the program's not perfect, but we're just doing our best. So
This is a once in a lifetime situation, and we got very fortunate to have gotten this money given to us, and it's just something we got to work through. But we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're in the home stretch. So thanks, everybody.
All right, so we have a motion to adjourn. Mr. Surges, seconds. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned, and I do want to give special thanks to our clerk for filling in today. We were shorthanded, so thank you very much. Did such a good job.